When I was in high school, I attended a church that insisted that the only way to take the Bible seriously was to take the Bible literally. This required wholehearted buy-in. You needed to believe that every possible question you could possibly have about God contains an answer only found in Scripture. There was no room for doubt. If you were to begin asking questions, the scaffolding was in danger of collapse. It was a slippery slope. If you didn't believe the earth was literally created in 6 days, just over 6,000 years ago, if you didn't believe that all of the animals today were descended from the pairs of animals on Noah's Ark, if you didn't believe that humans and dinosaurs roamed the earth at the same time, you were dangerously close to losing your faith. I learned apologetics, how to defend your faith when someone outside the church questioned you. I immersed myself in this carefully constructed system, and it came to influence every part of my life. If you didn't categorically oppose particular social issues or vote for a particular party, if you didn't believe the father was to be the head of the household and only men could hold leadership positions in the church, then you were in danger of backsliding. And if you questioned any part of this system, you were in danger of losing your faith entirely. There was no room for doubt. The Bible was the complete and final instruction manual for how to live. Everything you could possibly need to know regarding how to live a faithful life was contained within the Scriptures. I was told repeatedly, we worship a God of no mystery. When I began college, I took some time away from the church. Between some distance from this very systematized way of understanding God and the new horizons many of my classes were opening up for me, I began to take apart or deconstruct the scaffolding upon which I was told my faith must rest. A few years later, I found myself pulled back toward faith. I wanted to re-engage, but I simply could not wrap my mind around how to be a Christian without adhering to a literalist interpretation of the Bible. I didn't know how to engage Scripture without regurgitating internalized scripts that I had learned years ago. I wanted to know if it was possible to take the Bible seriously without taking it literally. I brought this question to our college chaplain, without whom I would not have eventually made it to seminary. And he answered my questions with this story. Imagine yourself in a dark, windowless room. It's pitch black. You can feel your way around, sense by touch what surrounds you, but you can't see anything. Then, a window suddenly and inexplicably appears in your room. Light begins pouring in. You look around and you begin to perceive everything that surrounds you. This light illuminates your reality in a way that your imagination could not have dreamed. You look through the window and are astonished to find an expansive and beautiful world just beyond the horizon. You see a glimpse of the way the world could be, just beyond the one you currently inhabit. And yet the source of that light that shines beyond the world and the one you are now is the same light that pours through your window, breaking into your reality now. You look around and find that this light is never entirely static. Different parts of your room are illuminated in unexpected ways at different moments throughout the day. Moment to moment, hour to hour, day by day, there's always some new wonder to witness. So what was it that illuminated your reality? It wasn't the window, it was the light. The window is, of course, vital for the light to shine through, but the window is not the light. The window is an instrument that allows the light to break into our midst. But some people begin confusing the window for the light. They even go so far as to begin worshiping the window. They turn all their attention to the window, studying it inch by inch with feverish intensity. The window is perfect, they say. It doesn't have any scratches or any blemishes or any smudges. This window is inerrant. This window is the light. But here's the thing. It doesn't matter whether the window has some scratches and smudges. It's not like the light will only shine through if the window is perfect. In fact, there may be a few spots and a few smudges on the window that makes it a little bit more difficult to perceive the light shining through. But it doesn't matter because the window is not the light. And others will spend so much time staring at this window that they refuse to turn around and see that the light is shimmering and dancing, casting new light on their once darkened world. They miss that the light is dynamic, breaking into our reality in unexpected and surprising ways. But then they'll say, the window is unchanging. The light is unchanging. Yes, the source of the light remains in one place. The window remains in one place, but the world is turning. The window refracts the light in new and surprising and unexpected ways, and we are called to pay attention to witness what the light is now illuminating within our world. The window is not the light, and to claim that the window is the light is to create an idol out of the window. I had always thought that the danger of idolatry was worshiping something or someone other than God, replacing God as our center of worship. But idolatry actually comes in a much more convincing disguise. The real danger is when we think we are worshiping God, but we're actually worshiping our idea of God. Idolatry happens when we worship a palatable, domesticated God, a God that we think we can contain in comfortable categories. I thought that where Aaron and the Israelites had gone wrong was in saying, this golden bull calf is your new God. But they don't hold a festival to the bull calf. Aaron and the Israelites were not building a golden calf to replace God. They're saying instead, this golden bull calf is the one who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. This golden bull calf is God. This story is a culmination of what had already been a rocky relationship between God and the Israelites. 40 days earlier, when they had arrived at the base of Mount Sinai, God had invited all of the Israelites to hear God speaking to them. Moses brought them to the foot of the mountain, and Mount Sinai was all in smoke because God had come down on it with lightning. The mountain was shaking violently. There were blasts of a ram horn growing louder and louder and louder, and Moses would speak and God would answer in thunder. The Israelites were terrified. This God of smoky mountain fire was unprecedented. The Israelites had no context for a God like this. This God refused to be contorted into easily digestible, palatable human categories. But the Israelites may have thought, you know what we do have categories for? Idols. An idol is a God that we can make and touch and that we know how to feed and send up offerings and throw parties for. We don't want a God of smoke and thunder and pillars of fire. We want a God we can wrap our minds around. We want a domesticated God, one that we can hold, palatable and understandable. We want a God of certainty. We want a God of no mystery. Aaron asked the people to give over their jewelry, rings of gold adorning their ears, gifts of plunder from the Egyptians, tokens of an economy of slavery, with which they pierced their flesh and adorned the bodies of their children. And when they did so, Egypt's stolen wealth took on this new shape, contoured into an image of strength and virility and power. How beautiful, Aaron may have thought, that these symbols of our former slavery would be transformed into this depiction of Yahweh, the one who had led them to freedom. So when the bull calf emerged from the fire, the Israelites proclaimed, this is the God that brought us up out of the land of Egypt. And Aaron builds an altar in front of it and says, tomorrow will be a festival to Yahweh. This golden bull calf they were claiming was Yahweh dwelling among them. But in reality, God really had wanted to dwell among them. In those 40 days on the mountain, God had been instructing Moses to how to build a tabernacle where God would be able to pitch a tent and reside among God's people. Those same gold earrings that Aaron instructed the Israelite men to collect from the people were the same earrings that God had intended to be melted down and used in the construction of the tabernacle. The idea of God pitching a tent among God's people was wholly outside the scope of their imagination of what God was capable of. Their idolatry, their clinging to categories they knew and were familiar with, prevented them from understanding the fullness of the glory and the power of God. Their limited imaginations could not comprehend all that God was capable of. This God was a boundary breaker. This God defied human categories. And by clinging to their idols, the scope of the power of their God diminished. Because anytime we try to fit God into cultural categories of our own design, God will break out of them. We worship a God that cannot be contained, held, or move in predictable ways, and that is good news. The story of the window and the light from my chaplain transformed my relationship with both Scripture and God. I felt liberated, like I was allowed to ask questions that didn't need to fit within the confines of what was an acceptable way to believe in God. It gave me permission to begin seriously considering the possibility that I was called to ministry. It gave me permission to expand what I thought God was capable of. And once you exercise your imagination and begin paying attention to all the ways that the light is dancing and shimmering in your midst, you begin to see God moving in ways that you previously thought were unimaginable. You begin to see God's light shimmering in places you'd never have expected God to show up. 2 weeks ago, I had the privilege of witnessing God show up in a space that my high school self could never have dreamed where God would show up. You may be familiar with Amy Grant, who has been referred to as the Queen of Christian Pop. You may be less familiar with Flamey Grant, the first drag queen to ever top the Christian music charts. 2 weeks ago, I attended a performance of hers, and she spoke up about her childhood growing up in an evangelical and fundamentalist church in Western North Carolina. Many of her songs explore the religious trauma that she had experienced trying to suppress her authentic queerness, the internalized shame she experienced as a result. But her songs also radiate joy. The God of her childhood had been so small, and now the fullness of God is embraced in the embodiment of her embracing her full self. In one of my favorite songs of hers, she describes how only the men were allowed to pray and speak and preach during church. As a kid, she says that Sunday mornings made her feel restless, bored, and numb. Her Bible was the one way to pass time. So she found stories that the men were conspicuously not preaching. She found the stories of Esther, Ruth, and Rahab. She found a Bible that refused to conform to the systemized way of understanding God that she had been told was the one true way to believe in God. And these stories had expanded her imagination of what God was capable of. She says, "My church had insisted that women be small, submissive, and unseen, but their own holy book betrayed that lie." Her song reminds me of Rachel Held Evans, a woman who had grown up in the evangelical world and famously deconstructed her faith and created space for others to follow. She writes, "If you are looking for verses with which to oppress women, you will find them. If you are looking for verses with which to liberate or honor women, you will find them. And this is why there are times when the most instructive question to bring to the text is not, what does it say, but what am I looking for?" People of God, what are we looking for? We are called to look for the light, the way in which God is illuminating our reality through these ancient stories. Because narrowing in on a handful of verses that promote harm and exclusivity and a worldview and a social structure and a political platform that is worshiping the window. It puts God into a box and says, this is all that God is capable of. It is idolatry disguised as the worship of God. Flamey Grant sings that everyone has a star that lights their way. We see our paths by someone else's shine, and Esther, Ruth, and Rahab, they were mine. My high school self never could have imagined a God who would light the way for a drag queen to preach the gospel. My high school self never could have imagined that the stories of the Bible could refract the light of God in this way. My high school self never could have imagined the people who approached Flamey Grant after her performance, thanking her, telling her, I just didn't think the church could be for me. I just didn't think God could love me. By taking my eyes off the handful of specks and the smudges on the window and turning my attention to pay attention to the light, I learned to bear witness to a God that loves with abandon, that shimmers and dances and glows like the light refracting off the sequined dress of a drag queen. Let us now take a moment to revel in the wondrous, dancing, shimmering light of God.